Entering the atmosphere in T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Omega Metroid podcast from OmegaMetroid.com. My name is Andy Spiteri, joined, as always, by my pal and yours, Doom Little Crossing. Doom, how are you? It's been a week. It's been a couple of weeks, I would say.
Absolutely, one of the weeks of all time, you could say. How's your week been going, Andy?
It's okay. It's okay, but I did wake up today in a bad mood for a lot of reasons, and sometimes when we get together and we record a podcast, it does kind of seem silly or trite or unimportant in the grand scheme of what is happening in this world to talk about something like Metroid, and I'm trying to power through that, obviously, because we do want to give people a little bit of a relief from the daily horrors that they are seeing on their news feeds. But I do think that we have to take a moment here and acknowledge just how awful things are right now. Two people have now been, more than two people, I think actually like 7 people have been murdered by ICE agents in the last couple of weeks here, and it's getting harder to not say anything, even on our limited platform that we have. And I wanted to say to everybody that that is waking up angry or scared or frustrated, or just waking up and every day is the new worst thing you have ever heard in your entire life on the news until tomorrow this administration does something to top it. I just wanted to say, hang in there. And what I really wanted to say actually was the best way that you can keep the hope up and keep yourself your mental health upwards is to engage with other people, engage with like-minded people, engage in your local protests, engage with community groups that are forming resistance or are forming some kind of collective. Really get engaged with that. And I know, like, every time we bring up real world stuff, we have inevitably a bunch of people that are always like, stick to Metroid and don't talk about real world politics and blah blah blah. And you know what, like, I get it. Nobody comes here to listen to that kind of stuff. They come here to hear about Metroid and a series that they love. But I'm sorry, like, we're just not going to do that. And I guess, like, the other thing I want to say as well is people, you almost have to be engaged. You can't just say, I don't want to talk about politics, I ignore it, it doesn't affect me, because I think that we've seen this administration act so recklessly and carelessly with complete abandon for the law, that there is going to be a point where you have to be engaged, or else you're going to find yourself on the receiving end of the same treatment. We've seen what is happening here. Pretty soon, these ICE agents are going to be in your town, in your street, murdering your friends. So really get engaged. And I totally appreciate the mental health aspect of it. And maybe that's not the best maybe you'd want to tune it out, but we're rapidly approaching the point where you just can't anymore. You can't, and it's a really unfortunate time, and it's a really monstrous administration and evil acts that have been committed here that we're seeing. And I mean, like, let's not also pretend that these acts haven't been perpetrated against minorities for a long time, but now we're seeing it expand. And, like, I'm really wanting to give a message to everybody out there to get engaged. Like I said, go to your protests, be safe, go organize with your local communities. Just get engaged in any way that you can, because this is a very slippery slope that we're seeing here in Minnesota, and I mean, or Minneapolis. I'm sorry. It's just it's a terrible thing. It's been bugging me. Obviously, all the last couple of weeks. As I'm sure it's been bugging you, Doom, and bugging a lot of our listeners. So I just wanted to say to everybody, like, get engaged, stay hopeful, stay positive, stay optimistic. If Metroid has taught me anything, it is that good always prevails over evil in the end. But it does take a collective in order for that to happen. So I thought that there was no way that we could do this show without addressing something, something this monumental that is happening in the real world. So yeah, I just I felt like we had to say something, and I know that Doom has a few words that he wants to say as well.
Yeah, before I say my piece, I just want to say rest in peace to Renee Good, Alex Preddy, 2 victims of domestic terrorism. And yeah, I'm not going to censor myself or play nice. ICE is our domestic terrorists, 100%. It is politically motivated violence, explicitly. They're not even trying to hide it. Explicitly with the intent of intimidation and fear. Not just, obviously, if you're a minority, but if you speak up or if you look at them in the wrong way against this Trump administration, they want to kill you and get away with it. Point blank, simple. And yeah, I'm not going to hide from it. I don't care if that offends anyone or if that pisses anyone off. That's the facts. And you know what? If you don't like it, you know what? There's 2 people that probably didn't want to be murdered this week. We don't always get what we want. In terms of what you can do, by the time that we release the episode, my city council meeting will have already happened. That's happening tomorrow, though, at the time of this recording. And me and a few other organizations, we're going to speak to a public forum to our city council representatives in hopes that we can make a very aggressive stance against ICE in the future. Luckily, they haven't really started to infiltrate our community yet, but we're taking these precautions in advance, seeing what's happening in Minnesota. I would imagine a lot of cities around the country are going to be doing very similar things. And so if this is something to you that means a lot to you, that you're concerned about, as Andy said, get involved with your local organizations, and especially talk to your representatives and attend your local city council meetings. Yeah. It sounds like a small nothing step, but the more people that show up to those, the more people that demand accountability and action and are willing to show up to their representatives, that is going to make a difference. Anyways, that's all that I have to say on my end.
No, I absolutely. I think that is really well said. I know a lot of people are angry. I'm angry. I imagine you're even more angry. I don't even live in America, but like we said, like, just because it's not happening in your town, in your country right now, the way that this administration is conducting itself and its secret police that are acting without consequence with an unlimited budget, it will not be long until they are in your streets, and you have to recognize this. So yeah, you know what, there's a really great meme that I saw yesterday that was called "Welcome to Protesting," and there's a lot of different ways that you can help. So like the fighter, for example, you march in demonstrations. So the paladin, you put your body between the vulnerable and cops. The cleric, you provide medical support and supplies to protesters. The bard, spread the word and help members of other classes keep up their spirits and mental health, etc., etc. So like there is so much that you can do in order to help, even if it's just telling the word or spreading the word, even if it's just fact-checking people that you know personally that are going along with this rhetoric that this administration is spewing and telling us things that our eyes and ears can easily disprove. So even if it's just as simple as you are fact-checking reality, that is like a form of resistance. So yeah, listen, I know that we'll probably get some angry people that are, the stick to Metroid crowd, and I'm just gonna say, like, just stop. just stop right now, because some things are bigger than Metroid, and I think it's our obligation to use any platform that we have to speak out about some of these, frankly, disgusting injustices that have perpetrated, frankly, since Donald Trump took office, again for the second time. So,
and to go off that too, like the people that do get into the comments and try to berate us about all that, like those folks are in the minority. The vast majority, I think we've done a really good job in cultivating a really good audience. And even beyond that, like at this point, abolishing ICE is just the moderate position in the country now. People despise ICE, as they should.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know. If you don't like it, either stop watching the video or leave us a negative comment and boost our engagement.
This is how we win. Either way, okay? Either way, we win. So, yeah, stay positive out there, guys, and be safe and care for your fellow community members. Don't let these thugs intimidate you into stop doing what is right. I know that's easy to say, but yeah, like we're going to look back on this and we're going to see and remember a lot of the really courageous people across the country, across the world, that are standing up to this administration and this organization that is conducting unlawful everything. We're going to look back at the people that are protesting and just say, like, these were courageous people, heroes, and we made it through this dark time. I firmly believe that. We're going to make it through, but we do need to help each other and support each other along the way. And the last thing that we will say before we move on and we talk about Metroid, because we do have some Metroid to talk about today. There was a bombshell of an interview that came out. But Doom was telling me about some Doom guy lore, actually, that I would like for him to share to everybody.
All right, I'm glad we're going to talk about that. But yeah, so I actually intentionally wore this brand new Doom shirt I got there. It's from Doom: The Dark Ages, my game of the year last year. Fantastic game. Would recommend it to pretty much anyone. Yeah, and I love this shirt. But the reason I wanted to wear this today specifically was because Andy and we knew that we were going, to make a statement on, all this horrific stuff going on right now. And I was thinking about, Doom Guy in particular, who's like one of my favorite video game characters. And, on the surface, he's a guy that just really hates demons, loves ripping and tearing. And to an extent, that's pretty true. I certainly love it. That's why most people like him. But what a lot of people don't know is his canonical origin story. It's not told in the game, but it's told in the first game's manual. And it's all about how, this guy ended up onto the Mars facility in the first game. And essentially the Cliff Notes version is he used to be, a military infantryman who was stationed on Earth. There was a protest going on, and he was ordered by his commanding officer to fire on peaceful protesters. And rather than doing that, he proceeded to beat the ever-loving pulp out of this commanding officer. And his punishment, he was sent to the Mars facility where the events of the first game take place. And so I felt like that in particular was pretty relevant to everything going on. And so, I just wanted to rep my boy here, because my boy most certainly says fuck ICE.
Yeah. And we say fuck ICE here too. So sorry for anybody on the NSFW bandwagon here, but sometimes you got to make an exception, okay? All right. That being said, let's try, and because I do think that one important thing that we can do to help ourselves in these times is we can't let them take our joy away. So we are going to talk about Metroid. We are going to have a discussion and a show about Metroid and video games, and we're gonna take an hour and just unplug and enjoy what we can in the world of video games here, because I do think that is important, and that is why even when we feel the way that we do, we still, by God, we still press forward here. So we have a lot to get to today, and a lot of real world Metroid stuff. Originally, we were going to be ranking the areas of Metroid Prime 4 today, but we're going to push that back a week. We had some pretty big news in the world of Metroid this week. Number one we got our first idea of how Metroid Prime 4 is performing. Not necessarily sales-wise, but sort of sales-wise, at least dollars wise as well. So nothing super concrete, but we at least got some indication. The other thing that we are going to talk about in great detail is we had a bombshell interview from Kensuke Tanabe, who is going to be stepping down as the producer of the Metroid Prime series. It's not exactly clear if he's retiring or not. It's probably just semantics, but we have a change in leadership that we're going to talk about. He also kind of confirmed a couple of those details that we went over a few weeks ago in the Nintendo Dream interview. Now we have specific names attached to a lot of these answers, and we have some extra kernels about the story philosophy of Metroid Prime 4 as well. So when you start to connect the dots, it does end up making a bit more sense when you read it. Omega Metroid independently translated the interview, so we will get to that in just a second. But where we should start is, like I said, our first kind of information about how Metroid Prime 4 is faring, and this is from Circana, who is an American basically an American market research company. And Matt Piscatella, formerly of IGN, I do believe, is like a widely respected industry veteran. Like, I remember him from back in like the early 2000s. So he is associated with Circana as well. So I feel like these are fairly reputable numbers. And what we had here is Metroid Prime 4 debuting on the top, let's see if I can get this right, the top 10 or the top 20 best-selling games of December 2025, ranked on dollar sales. So I want to emphasize that for a quick second. So we do not have sales figures here. This is just strictly how much money this game actually made. And it is worth noting that Metroid Prime 4 is, I believe it's $70 for Americans, and it's $90 for Canadians. $100 actually.
Yeah, 70. Yeah, 70 on Switch 2, 60 on Switch 1. Okay.
So it is worth mentioning, like, that we're talking about a game that's being sold at full price, and why I bring that up is because Metroid Prime 4 debuted at number 7, whereas Minecraft is on this list at number 8. It's very likely that Minecraft sold more copies than Metroid Prime 4 did, but at a smaller dollar rate. So like Minecraft is only going for, I don't even know how much, like $30, something like that. So
might even be $20.
It might be, like, but the point is, it's obviously going to be selling more copies, but it's not, in at least for the month of December, making more money in the United States. So just wanted to throw that out there. The other couple caveats that we should mention as well is there's no actual sales figures and there's no dollar figures as well. So we just have the list. Again, I feel like it's fairly reputable data. The reporting period goes through the 30th of November to the 3rd of January of 2026. So nothing super official yet, but and we probably won't get anything until the next earnings call from Nintendo. It's also worth noting as well that there are no digital copies that are factored into this list, because obviously Circana would not have access to that data. They also would not have access to anything like DLC, or basically anything digital is not included on this list. So, like I said, it's a snapshot of where Metroid Prime 4 landed, but not necessarily anything that you can really firmly put data behind, but at least it's something. And so Metroid Prime 4 has debuted in the 7th spot. It was behind Pokemon Legends ZA, which debuted in the number 6 spot. And 1 through 5 are a bunch of games that you would expect, so like Call of Duty Black Ops 7, NBA 2K26, Battlefield 6, Madden, EA Sports. It's really weird that it's not called like FIFA anymore, I gotta say. EA Sports.
No, that's
FC.
I will always call it FIFA. That's so weird.
I would have called it FIFA, but I was like, when I was reading it, I was like, EA Sports FC, what is that? And I was like, oh, that's FIFA.
Football club.
It'll be weird when it's not called Madden anymore. Like that's one I feel like could use a change. Maybe not. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I mean, pretty good news for Metroid Prime 4. Like those are kind of like let's call them like the casual gamer kind of games that you would expect to see really kind of topping charts like this. So I feel like a strong debut for the game. It's ahead of it's ahead of like games like Donkey Kong Bonanza, Ghost of Yotai, Kirby Air Riders is way ahead of that, ahead of Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. Couple of other like stalwarts that are on this list as well, like Grand Theft Auto 5. It beat that out. I don't think that's not for nothing. Minecraft, as we mentioned, Forza. So yeah, like we don't have like a lot of data, but I would say it looks encouraging at first glance. What do you take away from these numbers?
Yeah, I don't really know what to take away because, like you mentioned, a lot of the games that it is beating are like, either more older releases or some that I would say is about in the same category as Prime 4 in terms of like its audience. Like Kirby Air Riders, much like Prime 4, it's it's a very entrenched, encircled audience. DK Bonanza, I think, is a more wider audience, but that game also came out over the summer, so obviously it's not going to have that big boost that it had on launch day. So I'm not entirely sure what to make of it at this point. I'm kind of just waiting for that Nintendo earnings call to get like the full scope of like what those first couple of months in units look like. Honestly, at this point, I'm kind of expecting about average for a Metroid release. I'm not expecting anything above average or anything like horrifically below average. I think it's going to be, I think we're probably going to see something between 1 and 1.5 million.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I mean, they just announced that Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment just crossed 1 million, which I would say that this game is probably going to be on the similar level to that game, and they came out around the same time as well. My takeaway, and Matt Piscatella, by the way, said, quote, "This is physical only, and Metroid would lean more digital heavy than many other Nintendo games because of the audience." I actually don't know if that's true or not. I don't know like that necessarily Metroid fans are more prone to buying digital than not, but we'll see. But I would kind of, my takeaway that's based on no data, no nothing, it's just my hunch, is that you're probably going to see strong sales for the first month or so, and I think it's really going to drop off after, because I don't think that the positive word of mouth was necessarily there. And I do wonder, because like on one hand I'm like, man, obviously I want Metroid Prime 4 to be a huge success, right? I think we all do, but like on the other hand, now I'm just like, I've played Metroid Prime 4 and I don't necessarily want more games like Metroid Prime 4. So like, do I actually want this game to be this success or not? Like, because I'm kind of the belief, like, no matter what, Metroid Prime 5 is going to get made. But I think it'll obviously get made a lot sooner if Metroid Prime 4 is a success, but I wouldn't want Nintendo to take away from that. Like, oh, we want more games like Metroid Prime 4 is kind of just my stray thoughts with some of these numbers.
Right. I think the best case scenario, and I don't think this is a realistic scenario at all, I don't think what's going to happen, but I think most people could agree the best case scenario for Metroid Prime 4 would be if it became the new best-selling Metroid game of all time, but in spite of that, Nintendo is still aware that that is caused by external factors other than the game's reception, and they know how to course correct in spite of its success. I think that would be the best case scenario. I don't necessarily think that's what's going to happen at this point. I'm not, obviously I think pre-Metroid Prime 4's review dropping, I think a lot of us were pretty confident it was going to be the best-selling Metroid game. I'm not necessarily confident in that at this point. Well, again, I'll have to wait and see what the first earnings report from Nintendo looks like. But I mean, especially like Metroid Dread was getting just absolutely stellar reviews out of the gate. Was nominated for Game of the Year. Prime 4, even if it did make the listing, I don't think there's a chance in hell that game makes the Game of the Year nominations this year, at least in my opinion. But Yeah, I think the most realistic scenario is this is it sells about average for a Metroid title, give or take. I mean, I'm fairly confident it's going to sell better than Samus Returns at least. I think the
Oh,
circumstances of the
it'll
Switch 2
beat
pretty much guarantee.
yeah, Metroid Prime
Yeah.
Remastered. It'll beat that. And Metroid Prime Remastered is like 1.5 or something.
Yeah, and even if it was on par with Metroid Prime Remaster, I think given what this game is, I think that's fine enough. I think Metroid Prime 5 is going to be I think that is going to be critical both sales and reception wise on the series future, but that's a discussion for another time. But to kind of sum it up, that's just kind of where I'm at right now. Interesting piece of news, but ultimately still not enough information where I can make any definitive conclusions off it. I want to see that Nintendo earnings report before I really start kind of making a post-mortem.
Yeah, I think to your point about being nominated for Game of the Year, it's unfortunate, but I kind of think like Metroid Prime 4 as came and went. Like it doesn't have legs. It doesn't necessarily have like the fan base that I've seen that is clamoring to play it. I have talked to a bunch of newer Metroid fans that are like, hey, this is a really good introduction to Metroid Prime 4, and I think that's great. But I don't see the legs for this game. So I feel like I could be wrong. Maybe there's going to be like DLC, maybe there's going to be updates, maybe it will be supported, but I kind of feel like it's now just like, okay, let's move on. We all know the story behind the development here. Now it's out. It's out and we can move on. That's kind of the vibe that I get from Nintendo and Retro Studios as well, which is a really nice segue.
It's actually I was about to say that's if I may segue this, because we were actually talking behind the scenes kind of about our feelings of Metroid Prime 4, and I think I posted a DM to you where I was like, man, given the hype and the waiting, like I feel like, and given our thoughts on the game, I feel like I should be a lot angrier and depressed over like how Prime 4 turned out, but I'm really not. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not happy about it. I wish that I was adoring Metroid Prime 4 and that everyone was praising it and everyone was. I wish that was the timeline we lived in, but like despite that, like
I would change a lot of things about the
of,
timeline we lived in right now.
Yeah, right. Go back to the start of the episode,
Yeah.
but no, like in spite of that, I feel relatively fine with that. It's like I feel like I'm kind of moved on, and I feel like a big part of that, and this is where the segue comes in, is that we're getting a lot of answers, more information than I would have ever expected representatives of Nintendo to indulge over kind of why the game ended up as it is, and just kind of learning about that process. Regardless whether or not I thought some of the answers and philosophies were bonkers or not, it's just kind of nice peeking behind the curtain and actually like seeing like, hey, this is specifically how everything came to be, and getting that kind of closure on all that, I feel like has made it fairly easy for me to move on.
Yeah,
segue.
I agree. Like I kind of feel the same. Like I'm not angry at the game. There's definitely moments in Metroid Prime 4 that I really enjoy, but I do feel like as a whole, the things that I value the most in a game, which at this point to me is like you have to tell me a good story. Like there's just so many good games out there. Like every game plays good almost nowadays. So like for me to get really invested, you got to tell me a really great story. You got to have a character I can really relate to, and I thought that was like so missing. But there were certainly some level concerns that I had as well with the game. So like I feel like I'm also just like, you know what, this development was a really treacherous one, and now that the game is out, and you will see multiple references to hey, we had a deadline to meet in this interview that we're about to go over. Now that the game is out, I feel like, okay, let's move on. What's next? It's time for what's next. And so it's a good segue into the interview that we just posted on OmegaMetroid.com. It's a lengthy interview, so I'll link it in the episode description here. But it's an interview that was just conducted with Japanese publication Nintendo Dream, and they got a lot of really interesting tidbits out of a couple of people that they interviewed. So number one, is series producer Kensuke Tanabe. They also interviewed Retro Studios design director Vil Vandervoort, I'm sorry. And they interviewed your boy, Kenji Yamamoto. So a lot of heavy hitters in this interview here, and we heard a lot from Tanabe, we heard a lot from Vandervoort, and less so from Yamamoto, but still got some insights into that process. But the big, and by the way, we should also make mention is that we did independently translate this interview. We had a friend of the show and a great guy. His name is Japan Man Dan, who is just like such an awesome dude. He's been a follower on ours for a long time. Really great guy, and offered to do this translation for us. So, and he even he messaged me back, and he's like, oh man, I got some corrections to make. So just wanted to give Dan his flowers. Just a really great guy. You can find him over on Blue Sky, Japan Man Dan, and yeah, he put in a lot of work translating this for us and getting this across the finish line here. So there was a lot of interesting takeaways here that we will go over, but we'll kind of bury the lead here and start with the biggest piece of news, which is actually one of the last things that they ended up talking about in this interview. But Tanabe, and it's funny because a couple weeks ago we did a fan Q&A session where I'll paraphrasing the question, but it was basically like, how do you feel about the Metroid Prime series under Tanabe's leadership? And I think both of us were kind of like, you know what, let's give him another crack at it, but it's a short leash, at this time. And I can't imagine the reception to this game is related to this, but Tanabe announces that he will not be the executive producer of Metroid Prime any longer. So he is
more than that. He's
away.
No longer. Yeah, Metroid Prime 4 will be the final Nintendo title that he will be involved with on a developmental level. I believe is like the full scope of what he's saying. Which not something that I'm both surprised and not surprised. I'm surprised in the sense that it's like, whoa, that's like a bombshell announcement. The way it was announced, I didn't expect like a Nintendo Dream article to be like where we would hear that information. But like, at the same time, Tanabe is, in his mid 60s now. That's a pretty, that's retirement age. A lot of, and a lot of folks over at Nintendo with, a few exceptions here and there, but that's like typically, the retirement time you would expect out of Nintendo's NCL staff. Kit and Krista have also talked about this, and they've actually mentioned Tanabe in the past before this, and they did a really good breakdown after the Nintendo Dream article was released as well, that I definitely recommend folks check out if you want to hear again perspective from some former Nintendo of America staff. But I think overall, like, one, I'm glad that he's retiring, or I should say that we don't know if he's retiring. I want to make that very clear.
Let me jump in here for a quick second, because I want to read part of the interview here, because it is worded very curiously. So here, let's go in and let us see exactly what Tanabe says here. So, quote, and we'll get to the rest of this in a bit, but however, it took longer than expected to complete this game, and it has been decided that I will no longer be involved in the production of the series. So it has been decided that I will no longer be involved in the production of the series. Doesn't necessarily sound like a guy who was just like, I think it's time to retire. More so sounds like someone that maybe it was a suggestion to retire. And he does have another kind of quote at the end here, where he says, quote, "It's been 40 years since I joined Nintendo. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond will be my last final title produced at Nintendo. Instead of doing something completely new, I worked with Retro Studios to create a fun and unique experience." So you're right, actually, because I think that you said this. Like, it doesn't necessarily sound like he is retiring, but he's certainly retiring from producing Metroid Prime and Nintendo games. By the way, completely random, but I just remembered, Doug Bowser popped up on the executive board of Hasbro. Go figure.
I feel like something happened with Reggie similarly. Like after he left Nintendo, like he did a brief stint somewhere else, and then after that he officially retired. I can't.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm misremembering, but I feel like something like that happened.
No,
with
he
Reggie
joined
as
the
well.
board for I want to say it was like an inclusivity in gaming like something like that. But yeah, like so. I mean, not uncommon, but I just remembered old Doug, taking that Hasbro position.
Yeah.
Maybe Tanabe will be right there with him. Maybe they got an open
Yeah,
spot for Tanabe.
Yeah, we also got our first technically not a public appearance, it was a video, but we got to see Devin Pritchard at the New York Game Awards, who was actually introduced by Reggie, her former boss from years back as well, which was pretty funny to see that.
Did we talk about Devin Pritchard last week? I could have swore we did, but if we didn't, I can't believe I
don't think we did. No.
You know what I'm going to say about Devin Pritchard? It's nice to have a baddie as president of Nintendo of America again.
Yes.
It's been too long. Reggie's been gone too long. We needed another baddie at the helm of the ship. So, yes, it was good to hear from Devin Pritchard. Anyway, so back to Tanabe. The man is stepping down, or has been told to step down. Whatever, regardless, doesn't matter. The end story is like Kensuke Tanabe will not be the leader of Metroid Prime anymore, and it is worth noting a couple of things. Is number one, like I know that we're all a little bit disappointed with the way that Metroid Prime 4 turned out, but like if you look at this man's collection of work, this man has been involved in some of the all-time great video games, including obviously the Metroid Prime trilogy and Metroid Prime Hunters and Metroid Prime Federation Force. But I mean, like you look at some of the other games that he's worked on. Eternal Darkness, Entities Requiem, Supervisor, that was a great title for the GameCube. I was a script supporter on Ocarina of Time. I mean, like anybody that worked on Ocarina of Time is like immediately, GOAT status right there. Produced Mother 3, freshly picked Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land, which is a game that I legitimately love. Was involved in a couple Kirby games, was involved with Custom Robo, was involved with Star Fox, Battalion Wars, producer of Super Smash Bros. Brawl. I mean, like, you go down the list, and like this guy's catalog is just absolutely killer. I mean, Donkey Kong Country Returns, and Tropical Freeze, like
Luigi's Mansion 3, one of the best games on the Switch.
Yeah. So I know that maybe the sentiment on Tanabe is down right now, but like, I mean, you could take you could take Tanabe's catalog of games that he was the producer or had a very influential role on, and I think you could almost stack that against anybody. Like, so I do want to just make it known, like, this is not just like some guy that made like a bad game. This is a guy that has had a career of hits, of critical acclaimed games, and I think like that's kind of like it's on one hand it's a loss, but then again on the other hand, like there is a time where you do want those fresh new voices as well. So I think the timing is probably as right as it's going to ever be for this to happen. You always want to leave before you've been there too long,
Mm-hmm. And the internet does this a lot with people where like so one of my favorite directors, and like I'm probably gonna get hate on in the comments because it's cool to hate on this director now, is Taika Waititi. Jojo Rabbit is one of my favorite movies of all time. I absolutely adore that movie, and he's directed a bunch of other really cool stuff, such as What We Do in the Shadows. Thor Ragnarok pretty much saved Thor as a character in the MCU, but, and this is relevant, then he directed this movie called Thor Love and Thunder, which was absolutely atrocious. One of the worst MCU films probably ever made. Absolute garbage tier. And people rightfully criticized him for it. It was just completely tonally off-putting. The humor didn't land at all. And there were a couple of like cool visual effects, but just more or less, it was just a really disappointing film all around, especially from a very well-respected filmmaker at the time. But ever since then, now, because of that, it's like, oh, well, because Thor Love and Thunder is bad, now everything Taika Waititi has ever made was actually bad all along. And I really, I've, the internet's done that pretty much, for centuries now, decades, not centuries, because it's not been that long, but you know what I mean.
Feels like
Since
forever.
the internet's inception, yeah, since the internet's inception, like there's been this revisionism. Like the second that you make a bomb, like it completely tarnishes your whole career, and you're not allowed to enjoy anything from that creator anymore. And I've always hated that mentality. Like, even the greatest artists of all time are gonna have a miss and a stinker on occasion. I mean Yoshio Sakamoto with Metroid Other M, and at least in the case of Other M, like that game, I still didn't agree with like a lot of like kind of the overall critique that Sakamoto would get on like his past works too. But at least with Other M, that game was like lingering in our conscious for so long without like another like heavily involved Sakamoto title, or at least a Sakamoto Metroid title to really kind of combat that narrative. Whereas Tanabe, I feel like you can see it all around. I mean, I specifically brought up Luigi's Mansion 3 as that's like arguably like that's a fairly recent title that he was also very involved with at a producer level, and that
Yeah.
game is just absolutely fantastic from start to finish. There's another game that we glazed over, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past.
Link's
A lot of
Awakening as
people
well,
consider
yeah.
yeah, a lot of people consider that one of the greatest games of all time. We've talked about that in a lot of our Metroid Prime 2 anniversary coverage, and how Tanabe himself specifically in the artwork where he specifically cites his involvement in that game kind of being inspirational into how Prime 2 came to be. And so I think, and obviously we have been very critical about Prime 4. We've been very critical about some of Tanabe's decisions, especially after this interview, and how Prime 4 came to be. And I think that's all fair game, but I don't like using a lot of that stuff to also tarnish the legacy of his other work. There's something about that just always makes me feel very icky, and I don't like that.
Yeah, so I do think that it's important to make not just make like his entire career about Metroid Prime 4, as you said. Like there's a lot of great work there. While you were saying that, all I could think of was, do you remember the Steven Spielberg movie AI, Artificial Intelligence, with
I've never seen that. No.
I gotta admit, I've never seen it either, but it had the kid from The Sixth Sense, and this movie was like a bomb. Like I remember it was kind of like an Oscar bait movie, but it bombed with critics, it bombed at the box office, and I was like, if Spielberg can make a bomb, anybody can. So it can happen to the best of us. So yeah, let's. I think like Tanabe should be celebrated for his contributions to the Metroid Prime series. Without this man, like who knows where Metroid would be. Like if not for Metroid Prime and that renaissance that it had in the GameCube era, like I don't know where Metroid would be. So like I do think that Tanabe deserves his flowers, but it does seem like it could possibly be time. I'm going to. So I'm not going to read the whole interview. It's available on OmegaMetroid.com for everybody to check out. But there is some things that I wanted to go into specifically. And this one question that Nintendo Dream asked about the story of Silex is actually where we get the revelation that Tanabe is going to be stepping down. So I want to start with this question here, and we'll work our way backwards. So Tanabe says, like, I wanted, I'm going to paraphrase here. He says, I wanted to expand Silex's backstory and create a game about him and Samus as rivals. And so, that was my vision for the next couple of Metroid Prime games. However, quote, it took longer than expected to complete the game, and it has been decided that I will no longer be involved in the production of the series. So while there are no plans for a sequel, I hope that assistant producer Riza Tabata and Retro Studios will one day be able to complete the story. So Riza Tabata sounds like she is the next person to take over the producer reign over on the Metroid Prime series is certainly the takeaway there. We will have kind of a there's a link to a video if you wanted to go look for it on YouTube. We're gonna have some coverage on the website as well, just kind of like detailing Tabata's background and what kind of her role at Nintendo was. But like right now, she's the assistant producer of the series. And she's also got like a really impressive catalog as well. So has worked on Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. She was the producer of that remake for the Switch. So a really great title. She was assistant producer on Metroid Prime Remastered, assistant producer on Paper Mario: The Origami King, which I did not play, but I heard that was kind of like a fun, game in the Paper Mario series that maybe was more so what Paper Mario fans were looking for. She's worked on games like Punch-Out, Metroid Prime Trilogy, Donkey Kong Country Returns, a pretty extensive backlog here, and has worked in some capacities. She was a coordinator on Metroid Prime, an assistant producer and coordinator on Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. The same thing for Corruption. So this is someone that is heavily involved with the history of the Metroid Prime series. And encouragingly, I believe, I'm gonna roughly quote what she said, but around the time that Metroid Prime 3 Corruption came out, she said something along the lines of I don't believe that having other characters or other voice actors or something like that is beneficial to the Metroid experience. So it does kind of seem like her philosophy might be a little bit different than Tanabe's in terms of what we saw in Metroid Prime 4, which was a lot of the non-playable characters joining.
Right. And it's hard to derive too much of that because that was in 2007.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I was a very different person in 2007 than I am today. Granted, I was in middle school, so I had definitely a lot more time to evolve. But that is, that's almost 20 years ago. So I think it's a really interesting interview, especially because, again, they're promoting Prime 3. And that's almost a kind of quote that you would associate as something you would not want to say when marketing, Prime 3, a game that is specifically trying to be more cinematic and more, I mean, it's the first time that voice acting in general is a major piece of a Metroid game, and that's
She's
something that's heavily
game.
Marketed. And so obviously she's not saying that she hates the game. Obviously she really likes it. She wants to promote it. She wants to talk about it. But it's also a really interesting kind of think out loud piece that Nintendo still decided to publish, at least in their at least in the Japanese text. So it is really interesting to read that interview for sure, especially in hindsight today.
Yeah, so that looks like our new producer of the series. So I take a look at her resume and I feel like I have a lot of confidence in Tabata in order to maybe take Metroid somewhere different that it's never been. But I actually think that we should focus on the question that actually brought this up, and I'll read it here. So the Nintendo Dream asks, quote, "Let me ask you about Silex. He was still a mysterious character even when he made a brief appearance in Metroid Prime 3, what led him to being the spotlight in this game." And so this is where you kind of get the same answer that Tanabe gave about I asked the developers of Metroid Prime Hunters not to flesh out his origin story because I wanted to use it in a future game. So now I bring this up because it really it's almost the identical answer that we saw a couple of weeks ago when we covered the other interview. So it really does seem like that was Tanabe that was doing that interview. Especially after this interview with the identical answers, it does feel like Tanabe, if not being the person interviewed, was the person who oversaw the interview and gave the final say in the answers. I would bet that he was the person being interviewed though. It definitely seems more and more likely. I think so. And I gotta be honest, what I wasn't expecting from this interview was to get lower, but we have some actually. So another question. So, and this is a great question because I would have loved to ask this as well. But Nintendo Dream is just what specific actions did Silex take after arriving on the planet Vuros? And I'm great question. That's a great question. And so the answer from Tanabe, and I'm just gonna quote this because I love this answer. Silex was badly injured when he was transported here, and by chance was transferred to the inside of the Chrono Tower. Would have loved to see that in the game, but I digress. He sneaked into a healing pod that was there and synced with the Chrono Tower. Through this, he obtained information about the Lemoran and learned that in order to escape Vuros, they would need to use the Master Teleporter, and that in order to activate the teleporter, they needed 5 Master Keys. He then used his Metroids which were also transported there to try and control the Key Guardians and obtain the keys. But the Key Guardians' mental strength was stronger than Silex's, and as a result, both of them lost their normal thought processes and became beings filled with only murderous hostility.
Would have loved to see that in the game.
Yeah, like, okay. Maybe that's the DLC that we're getting. We're gonna see Silex just like go completely postal after the Metroids, sync up all the thoughts of these Key Guardians. So the answer continues. It took time for Silex to recover, and during that time, he was basically unconscious. But during the times he was awake, he used the Cybots to attack Samus to try and steal the keys that she had obtained. At the moment of his awakening, Silex's consciousness and Samus's consciousness were temporarily linked, and Samus experienced Silex's memories like a flashback. There you go. That's what happened when Silex landed. So if you have any more burning questions, rest assured they have been answered here by Tanabe with this response.
I don't even know what to say to that.
That's a wild answer. And this one, I'm gonna build off that with this stuck out to me as well. Like, just like speaking of lore, again, I was not expecting to get anything related to really the story of Metroid Prime 4, but
Right.
they also asked, like, quote, the culture, history, and future of the Lemorn are deeply impactful in the story. How did you decide on their appearance and settings? And so Bill Vandervoort has a little bit of an answer here as well, where they wanted to incorporate like aquatic elements, the priest robes, make the Lemorn look kind of angelic and be the antithesis of what the Grievers ended up looking like, and focus their civilization on the telepathy and like. But they also wanted to put in a motorcycle, so they were like, well, how do we do this? But I thought that this was a kind of a neat answer from Tanabe, where I just really wasn't expecting this. So he said, like, following the prophecy, Chatoya and the 12 Lemorn were transported to various planets across the multiverse with a small return teleporter to search for the Chosen One. And pausing right there, like, you're talking the multiverse and somehow one of these 12 people just finds Samus? Those are, like, buy a lottery ticket, because that's great odds. But, I mean, I digress. The quote continues, however, they were unable to find them, and each Lemorn ended up passing away on their respective lands. However, this means there are still 11 teleporters in existence. It would be difficult to create individual stories for all of them, but I think we have left open the possibility of creating some stories in the future. So there potentially is a world where a future Metroid game brings you back to the planet Vuros, according to this.
I hope that never happens. I hope that never happens. I'm done with the Lemorn. I'm ready to move on from them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I and it kind of feels like I don't think that, like, it feels kind of like what I thought like this game was, where it's like, hey, we can close the book on this if we want, but there's enough open-ended elements to where if we did want to revisit it, we could. I'm guessing that, like, of the more likely elements, Silex would be the one to return, and especially after the interviews, that does seem to be, like, the direction that they for sure want to head in. I hope we never see the Lemorn again. I'm done with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you know what? If the ending scene of Metroid Prime 4, even if it was the exact same game, if it just ended with, like, maybe there's one Lemorn left and he's like, ha ha ha, got her to plant this memory fruit, like, I got you, sucker. And, like, showed, like, a little bit of edge, like, anything to basically separate them from the Chozo. I'd be, like, totally down with seeing the Lemorn come back. I wouldn't necessarily be rushing to go to Planet Vuros, but I would be down to see the Lemorn. But, like, there is just nothing to this race that, like, doesn't already exist with the Chozo. Like, it might as well have just been the Chozo, because it feels like the alternate version of them.
Yeah, it really is just the Metroid Prime 1 story again, but a little worse.
So I wanted to focus on this answer too, because I thought that it was kind of interesting as obviously a Zelda fan. But one other question was, how did the newly introduced Viola bike come about? And so Tanabe says around 2016 when I launched the project, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was gaining positive reviews for its open world setting. So I will fact check Mr. Tanabe here because Breath of the Wild did not launch until 2017, but maybe he means internal reviews. I don't know. Nevertheless, Tanabe continues, I often heard people say online, I want to play an open world Metroid game. However, the characteristic Metroid gameplay of gaining abilities and expanding your range of action contradicts the open world mechanic of being able to move freely over a wide area from the start. So I want to pause there for a second. I just like inherently disagree with that statement. I do not think that if you have an open world game, that doesn't mean that you should or can go anywhere immediately. That's what Breath of the Wild did, but there are lots of open world games where like there are certain portions of the map which are sectioned off and you don't get access to that until you get a certain tool, much like Metroid. So I push back against that, and I actually say, like, you know, I don't know about you, Doom, but from the chatter that I've been seeing in the Discord, like, I think people are still very much open to the idea of an open world Metroid game. I am. Like, would it be my... I don't know if it'd be, like, my first necessarily choice, but, like, if you were telling me, like, we're going to make an open world Metroid game, I would be excited.
I mean, I proposed an idea in the chat that I mean, obviously I'm biased because I proposed that and I really like it, but my idea was like, you know, it's a Metroid game where you have three different levels. You have space, where you kind of, you know, you're affected by like the anti-gravity, and that's where like a lot of the ship stuff comes in handy, and you can board like debris and asteroids and space stations. Then you have the land, which is kind of the more open world, maybe the hub area, where you do have those more open world elements, and then you have the underground areas, which are those traditional cave-like labyrinths that you come to expect from a Metroid game. And it's still, everything feels all interconnected and cohesive, and there's ways to go from one area to the other seamlessly, and it's not just one way. And I think, obviously, I'm not a game designer, but like I feel like as a template, like there's a really solid foundation in there for a killer Metroid title.
Yeah, I think so too. Like, I really don't think that being open world contradicts the Metroidvania aspect of a Metroid game. So, but anyways, let's continue here. So we're talking about how the newly introduced Viola bike came about. So Tanabe thought of a compromise here, and this is something that they reiterated back in the previous article, but I'll read, quote, still I thought within a limited area I could respond to that demand. Furthermore, I thought that if the player could ride around there in an exhilarating way on a motorcycle, it would add some rhythm to Metroid's gameplay, which is characterized by a sense of confinement and tension. However, when I later saw Link riding a motorcycle in the downloadable content for Breath of the Wild, I thought, wow, they'll think I copied that, and wondered what to do. But then I thought, no, I'm not copying them, and Samus riding a motorcycle is sure to look cool, and decided to create a motorcycle without further hesitation. So, number one, I totally thought, like, yeah, they must have seen, like, the Master Cycle Zero in Breath of the Wild and been like, okay, cool, let's do this for Metroid. Number two, he is right. Samus riding a motorcycle is cool.
It does look cool. I do love the key art of, like, all the key art of Samus on Viola looks awesome. I got one of the My Nintendo posters with it, and so, in spite of my thoughts on the desert, it is, like, just really cool imagery.
It's fun to ride around, I think. Like, it's fun to drift, it's fun to boost, it's fun to, like maybe combat wasn't necessarily all it could have been, but, like, I love ripping around the desert. Like,
I think it controls great. I enjoy the act of actually driving it from, that is not where my critiques lie.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting as well. So I won't read the rest of that answer there, but just some interesting stuff about the implementation of Viola. So
kind of a side point on the 2016 Breath of the Wild thing. I think Tanabe actually might be talking about the E3 showing, because that was like that year. That was like one of the biggest games that, like, everyone that attended E3, that was like one of the big games that everyone came out of that show talking about. And so I think that might be either he's getting
it is right,
possible.
yeah.
It's possible he's getting those years confused, but I think it's also a strong possibility he's talking about that E3 that E3 presence, because that was a massive game, which is pretty incredible considering Nintendo's kind of lackluster year at E3 that year.
So here's a spoiler for you, Doom. I've been working for the 40th anniversary of the Legend of Zelda series. I've been working with some of my Zelda Dungeon colleagues, putting together a top 40 moments in the Zelda, basically history. I fought for that E3. Like, it was a terrible year for Nintendo, but that booth that they had with Breath of the Wild, literally their only game that year, was just so impressive. Like, if you were ever gonna have an E3 where you just have one game, like, first of all, you want that one game to be a game the caliber of Breath of the Wild, and like number two, man, you really want to go out, like, all out, like they did with the decorations and stuff. Like, I know it was just the one game, but like, that's one of the most memorable E3s that I can ever remember.
I mean, I'm not gonna say it's one of the most memorable E3s, but I'm also not as much of a hardcore Zelda fan as you are. But yeah, it was definitely like that was the game where like Nintendo threw the kitchen sink at that game. It was a Hail Mary, and it paid off.
Well, let's go. Let's go to a question that I think didn't go down well before in the previous interview, and now really I think has went down some people's gullet sideways, and that is the ending of the game. So the question is, I'd like to ask you about your Galactic Federation allies. How did you come up with their character settings in the relatively unusual situation of fighting together with allies in the series? So Tanabe starts off hot and says, I actually don't play many games. Instead, I watch a lot of movies. I majored in film production in college. Therefore, when designing a game, I don't often analyze or study other games. Instead of considering the game's mechanics, I focus on how many wow moments I can create. So let's pause there for a second. A lot of people, including some of our own Omega Metroid staff, have been like, he doesn't play games, he only watches movies. What a bum. But I actually don't take any umbrage with that, like, at all. Hideo Kojima doesn't really play games. This guy watches movies, but yet makes these really compelling games and narratives, and I don't think that is necessarily a problem. The problem that I take away from this, Doom, and maybe this is like sensitive to me because I'm a wrestling fan, but like, I focus on how many wow moments I can create. That one burns me a little bit, because like, if you are even familiar at all with like WWE, for example, they don't really care about making a good story. They just want a good moment, even if it doesn't make sense. You're not a wrestling fan, but you probably even saw last year when John Cena turned heel, right? Like the meme.
Yeah, I remember that was a huge talking point. Yeah.
So they did this show afterwards. It was an official WWE show. It was called Unreal. I didn't watch it, but like I read the review of it, and John Cena was like, "Yeah, there was no plan after that. We just wanted to create a really great moment." So like, when I see like someone saying like, I wanted to create a wow moment, I'm just like, you know what I would rather have than a really shocking moment is like a really complete and great narrative. How about that? How about like we like look beyond just a moment? And like, I get like, you know, we're all on our phones and videos and algorithms and stuff like that. Moments are much easier to circulate than they are, you know, big complex narrative stories. But yeah, that was a takeaway for me, where it was like, well, that almost makes sense in a way.
I was actually pretty astounded from this quote as well, because it pretty much depicted exactly my summary of the game. Like, when I think of Prime 4, it's like, man, this is a game that has some fantastic moments. It has some insanely high peaks, but with those peaks comes some incredibly low valleys. And I feel like, you know, whether intentionally or not, I think Tanabe just kind of summarized my entire problem with Metroid Prime 4 is those, you know, it's such an intense focus on those moments, but not an equal treatment across the scope of the game, or at least the results aren't treated equal. I'm sure, you know, the things that I didn't like, obviously there was a lot of care put into that as well. I'm not saying that they were lazily and haphazardly put together, but like, yeah, like overall Metroid Prime 4, it's a very bumpy an inconsistent experience more than I would say a complete bad experience. And I feel like, yeah, I feel like Tanabe's quote just kind of like just summarized that for me, and I was like kind of stunned reading that again, whether that was intentional or not. And but yeah, the movie quote though, this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier when I said that, like, people will look at a creator and they'll look at one bomb, and then they'll pick apart their entire history to kind of deduct why they're actually a bad creator this whole time, completely ignoring like all of the fantastic projects that did go off without a hitch. And obviously we've had a lot of people in our community that have been using that. And here's the thing: if Metroid Prime 4 was the only game that Tanabe had did, if this was like his first game, or maybe if he did have that career, but he was going on like maybe a string of like bad releases, maybe that's something you could look at. But again, like, Metroid Prime 4 is one game, and I can think of so many, again, recent games, let alone, the 4 decades worth of work that he's done with Nintendo since the NES days. And so I just don't think that's a fair critique. Again, I think there's absolutely critiques that you can put on Metroid Prime 4. Obviously, a lot of stuff that you can attribute to Tanabe's philosophy and how that just didn't vibe with a lot of players, ourselves included. But I don't think using, the lack that he plays any games, again, which I don't think that's something that he just started doing recently. It sounds like
I don't think that's unique to
kind of
him
his thing
either,
for his
by the
whole
way.
life.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a fair thing to attribute to him regarding Prime 4.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think there's a lot of people that probably don't play that many games that watch movies. Like I said, like if you're the producer, like, you probably don't want to know how to code like this and that or whatever, but like, you probably do want to watch and get ideas and inspiration for themes and stuff like that. It's just the quality of the theme that you are trying to take. So Tanabe continues here. With Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, I wanted to create a game where at the final moment of completion, the player feels a sense of surprise and conflict when they press the A button, which means completing the game. So maybe the quote from a couple weeks ago was taken out of context. We were kind of making fun of like the whole, like, how many games do you finish by pressing the A button? Maybe he just meant this button. And actually, Tanabe says, we did this once before with The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. But this time, we wanted to make the game even more memorable by providing a situation where players will watch the end credits while wondering, what? Is that the end? I expect there will probably be a negative reaction. But personally, I feel that movies that leave a lasting impression on you after watching them are more impactful than movies with a happy ending. So I thought, can we do that in one game? So we set up the final scene and then considered the overall structure of the game. To that end, we set up Federation soldiers who accompany Samus and planned gameplay that would develop a bond between them and Samus as the game progressed. We actually had planned several events that would deepen these bonds even more, but due to production constraints, we had to cut them. We are truly sorry for that. So, to be fair, it does sound like there was some more on the table that just couldn't materialize. It sounds like this game had a deadline, right? Like, it sounds like they were like, this has to be shipped this year, like, or else, like.
There's other stuff in the interview where it's like clearly like, okay, we have to scramble to get this done.
Yeah.
Like, there's in the interview itself.
Now, that being said, I don't think that Tanabe is necessarily wrong about his idea that, like, movies that leave a lasting impression on you after you watch them are more impactful. Like, I think of a movie like Conception. I'm like, that movie was awesome. Was it a dream or was it not a dream? I don't know. And you still debate it. Like Metal Gear Solid 3, a great ending, a very somber ending for that game. Link's Awakening is probably the perfect example, and this man worked on that game. Like, that is... have you ever played Link's Awakening, Doom?
I played the remake. That we talked about that on our top.
Yes.
That made it on my top 10 Switch games. I love
That's right.
love Link's Awakening.
Like, what a great... Like, that is how you do Metroid Prime 4 properly, right? Like,
yes,
because that game, yeah, you really do feel like this melancholy sense of like, if I beat the game, like I'm gonna wake the windfish up and everything is gonna disappear. Final Fantasy X does something similar, but like, maybe it was due to the production constraints, but like, I just think that there's a difference between having a provocative ending like that and just having a bad ending. And I think, for me, I feel like this is definitely a bad ending. It leaves a lasting impression, but it's not really one that makes you like think or ponder or contemplate. It's just like, this just kind of sucked. Like, it didn't feel like Samus. It didn't feel like, you know what I mean? Like,
I think there's also a difference between, I don't even know if bad ending is the right word. I would say dissatisfying ending is the right word, because there are movies that quote unquote end badly, in the sense that like it's not a happy ending. When I think of quote bad but satisfying endings, I think of Avengers Infinity War. That is not a happy ending. That is not a happy end. Now, granted, we all knew that like there was going to be another Avengers movie and that all of that was going to be undone, yada yada. But the point is, I think I think that is something like what Tanabe was going for. It's like, hey, it's going to be a melancholy ending, but something that's ultimately going to be satisfying. And that, I think, is where Metroid Prime 4 ultimately fails. I understand the philosophy behind that. I understand what he was trying to do, and to an extent I respect it, but it's the execution that's the issue. And I think just making an ending that's not happy in and of itself is able to create something that's ultimately satisfying. Those are two different things, and I think that is where Tanabe's philosophy ultimately fails in Metroid Prime 4.
I think that, like, even within the Metroid series, there are better examples of what he is trying to convey. Yeah, I think of a game like the ending of Metroid 2.
Prime 3.
Or sure, Metroid Prime 3.
Metroid 2, yeah.
Yeah. Even Super Metroid to an extent, like after the baby has...
Yeah, I would argue that's the example right there. So that's a wonderful example, actually.
Like, now that one, like, none of these games, like, you, the player, are making this choice necessarily. Like, the events of Super Metroid lead to that. Metroid 2, I feel like, is the one for me that's the closest, because it's like... Imagine if you ended that game where you could either destroy the baby Metroid or let it live. Like, I think that would be something akin to what he's trying to go for here. But I mean, I think, like, ultimately it just missed the mark, and plotting the whole game around that moment, I don't think that's like the worst idea, but I'm not sure that was the best way to get that desired reaction with a bunch of characters that you just don't know and don't really care about.
And especially because, again, like the quote unquote sacrifice feels incredibly manufactured. It doesn't feel natural. As we talked about, kind of, off the cuff last episode, there's so many, holes. Like, wait a minute, if Samus is able to teleport, why do we even need the master teleporter anymore? None of this makes any sense. And so, yeah, it's just, even beyond the scope of that, though, it's just not something that feels satisfying. And that's ultimately the issue why it fails. If it was somber but satisfying, it would work. But it feels manufactured and not satisfying.
So, another great takeaway from this interview is that, in addition to series producer, Kensuke Tanabe took on another job title in this production. And that, my friends, is the official scan writer of the game. This blew my mind, actually, a little bit. Like... so here we go. Let me pull up the exact quote here. So I'm going to paraphrase here because it's actually a really long quote, but basically what Tanabe is saying is that they hired a professional writer to write the scan dialogue, but had a difficult time getting this person to fully understand the game's specifications. And since they were worried about meeting the deadline, Tanabe's like, I'm going to write it myself. And this is a crazy line that he says. I'm trying to find it here, but like, okay, here we go. I wasn't originally planning on writing the scan text. Until now, staff at Retro Studios have been responsible for the in-game text, but that person that did it before no longer works there. One man, one woman, potentially, brought down the Retro Studios empire and forced Tanabe to go and write this himself. There was not a single replacement for this scan writer that they could have possibly found. And
suddenly,
nevertheless,
and again, in terms of like going back to the start of the episode, when we're talking about like catharsis and answers, like, oh, that explains that. Like one of my, I won't even say it's my biggest critique now of Metroid Prime 4, but leading into the game, one of the things that was just weird is like, what is up with these weird naming conventions? Like all these names just sound so weird and un-Metroid. This makes sense now. This explains all of that actually.
and it actually
And so-
explains like the lack of scans too, because like there is no
Yes.
lore in this game. Like there's a handful of Lemorne lore, there's a handful of data entries, but like there is nothing else really aside from that. And you get that in a very short collection. Like there's nothing to like. There's no lore, Galactic Federation. There's no Silex lore. Like Silex lore would be desperately like that would make this game
Yes.
way better. So he goes on to say, so we decided to ask a professional writer to do it. However, since writers are expert at writing text, their natural priority is to write good, clever sentences. That's in quotes. This meant that the text didn't quite fit the gameplay we were hoping for. It was also difficult to get them to fully understand the game's specifications, and since we were worried about meeting the deadline, I decided to write it myself. And so, maybe to add some context to what that line, because you read that line on its own and it's ridiculous. What
Right.
Tanabe is kind of saying is like he wants it to sound kind of like researchy, professional, like no necessarily like emotion. He wants it to sound like a computer log, basically. And he also wants it to fit onto one scan, essentially, is what he is saying. He doesn't want any like line breaks when you press A to get to the next page. So there was a lot of self-imposed kind of restrictions here. And Tanabe decided, he continues, to be honest though, I was so busy with the work that I made some mistakes when making changes. So although it was fun, I shouldn't have done it. I also don't understand the nuances of English expressions when it comes to the dialogue of the Galactic Federation soldiers, so I left that to the writers. However, when it came to the Japanese translation, I asked game designer Taro Kudo to write the dialogue in a way that would be more natural and fit the game and characters, rather than simply translating it. So, yeah, there you go. There you go. Tanabe just writing all the lore for Metroid Prime 4.
Which, to be fair, like you can see in the credits, he is credited with the scanned translations, but it was really interesting hearing, you know, kind of how that came to be, because in the retrospective, he talks about that he was responsible for translating the text to the Japanese game, but that Retro was the one who wrote all that original text. So it was really interesting, you know, obviously for that catharsis, but also just hearing like, wait a minute, how did he become the main scan text writer in general? And yeah, what a wild story. And again, just kind of like, you know, more evidence of just how turbulent this game's development was.
The last quote that I want to talk about is actually one from Bill Vandervoort, who is the design director. So they asked him about the levels. And I'm not going to read the question or the whole answer, but basically Vandervoort's quote here is, there are also goals for the game's story and characters, which sometimes drive the choices you make. For example, the initial path through most of the game's zones are linear, which was effective in telling the story of the zone and the Federation soldiers within. We wanted to motivate players in a familiar, narrative-driven way. Now, before everybody completely dumps on that, I will say Flare Pool has a really, like, that zone does tell a story with, like, Duke and Armstrong going all the way through. Same for the Great Mines, with all of the Galactic Federation soldiers kind of making their heroic sacrifices. Maybe you could argue Ice Belt as well with Takabe in there, but I mean, it really does seem like so much of this game was based around the idea that we are going to be having these Galactic Federation soldiers, which is just like everything from the design of the levels to the story concept, everything was designed. It was reverse engineered to be like, how do we work in these Galactic Federation soldiers to get us that ending that we want, that makes players feel, I don't know, remorseful or whatever. And it's just interesting to hear that philosophy on the level design. And
Especially from
yeah,
Nintendo, because that's pretty antithetical to how they typically approach game development. It's typically like, hey, let's find a unique mechanic, let's get a fun, level design, kind of character abilities first and foremost, and then let's kind of like use that to influence the story. Maybe
yeah.
we'll have some pre-baked ideas, but like ultimately the level design comes first, and then how is that going to influence the story? Really, and I think it kind of goes back to the comparisons we've been making at Prime 4, but the only other Metroid title I can think of where the story was influenced in the level design is Metroid Other M.
They Vandervoort continues here. Even in the areas you visit for the first time, there are backtracking and exploration sections, but the flow is not as complex as in the original Metroid Prime. Returning to these zones on your own later in the game will offer new experiences and subtle discoveries, especially if you return with new abilities. That means there are rewards for especially curious players and those who want more freedom in their exploration. Um, so it was certainly intentional. It was an intentional choice to make these levels more straightforward. Some, if they're being cruel, might say dumbed down for players. I think that both of them could be true. Um, yeah, it's a really interesting interview, and I think we've kind of reached like all the main points that I wanted to bring up here. But it's a fascinating read. I would really encourage everybody to go read it at OmegaMetroid.com. You do get a lot of frank answers from Tanabe, and you can see like there were specific choices made in this game, and it's why the game turned out the way that it did. And maybe if you're a new Metroid Prime player, or maybe you're an old Metroid Prime player, and you're maybe you really loved the game because like it is a more streamlined experience. It is kind of less backtracking. It is less getting lost, and maybe to some that's great. But I certainly read this interview as a longtime Metroid fan, and I do unfortunately come with the takeaway that like this almost wasn't a game for me. Like Metroid Prime 4
Yeah.
wasn't a game for Metroid fans. It was it kind of came across as like a game that I actually don't know who it was for, because I think that there are better like first person adventure games out there that like BioShock is a great example of something like that. Um yeah, it explains a lot about the game. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's plenty more time to do postmortem. I think we'll probably do that postmortem again after we get that first Nintendo sales report. I think that's gonna be the perfect time to like really reflect on everything, what the game's legacy will be, Metroid moving forward, et cetera, et cetera. Metroid Prime moving forward, I should say.
Yeah. Well, there it is. We do just want to again wish Tanabe all the best and whatever he does next. Hopefully, we see him pop up somewhere. Say what you will about Metroid Prime 4. I definitely think that this was a miss, but the man has definitely dedicated his life to making exceptional video games and great experiences for fans. And for that, and for working on the Metroid Prime trilogy, plus all the other, I mean, like literally trilogy, Hunters, Federation Force, like remastered. I do think that we should be giving our flowers to Kensuke Tanabe, because this man has done a lot for Metroid and a lot for Nintendo, and we wish him the best in whatever is next. Yeah, very excited to see what Metroid Prime is going to look like under the leadership of Riza Tabata, who we will probably be talking about in the future. So, lots and lots of great stuff in the interview. Just want to thank again Japan Man Dan for translating this for us. We appreciate it, and you can read the whole thing over on OmegaMetroid.com. There we go. Anything else before we get out of here, Doom?
But it again, just it's very wild seeing. I guess it's technically mostly coming from Tanabe, but just wild seeing Nintendo be so transparent about this game. I'm happy they are, but it's not what I would have expected, not what was on my bingo card at all. And it's
No.
been really, again, just really fascinating and cathartic, just kind of learning about why the game is what it is.
Yeah. Okay, everybody. Well, that's going to do it for us. We want to reiterate, stay safe out there, engage with your communities, and fuck ice.
Fuck them.
we're going to get out of here. Thank you for listening to the Omega Metroid podcast. Make sure that you are checking us out wherever you get your podcasts. Like, subscribe, recommend, rate, review, all of that fun stuff. And hey, if you got a Metroid fan in your life, tell them where they can get their weekly Metroid fix. Every Wednesday, new shows are coming out, and OmegaMetroid.com has the complete history of the Omega Metroid podcast, plus all of these articles that we are referencing and talking about, plus walkthroughs for all of your favorite Metroid games, plus a link to our YouTube page, which you should subscribe to and see these podcasts in full, beautiful video form. We've even got some walkthroughs, video walkthroughs over on our YouTube page as well. So, make sure that you're checking out OmegaMetroid.com for all of your Metroid news and features and guides and whatever your deal is. If you're a Metroid fan, you could probably find it there. Give us a follow over on Blue Sky at Spiteri316, at Doomlacrosse, at Omega Metroid. And last shill is, if you have not had enough of us talking about Metroid Prime 4, we've got something for you. The newest episode of GUI Plays Metroid is now live, and guess what? We talk about Metroid Prime 4. We're only talking about that game for this month, but Gu is going to give his thoughts on Metroid Prime 4. Did he like it? Did he not like it as a Metroid fan? I don't know. You'll have to tune in and see. $4 gets you in the door. Patreon.com/SPNet. And after that, we're going to be playing Metroid 2 for the very first time. So that's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to do it for us, my friends. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you back here next week. Till then, ciao.